Imam Ali ibn Hussein Zain al-Abidin, we mentioned the role he played at Karbala and his bravery in Kufa and Damascus. But we have to realize that these events were just the beginning of his imamate. After returning to Medina, he spent the next 34 years of his life reviving the Islam that Yazid and his cohorts had destroyed. Imam al-Sajjad was wise in his actions after Karbala and knew that he had to be careful in how he opposed Yazid. And the Imam persevered through many harsh conditions and faced many challenges. After Karbala, the Ahl al-Bayt and the Shia were decimated. All of the outstanding companions of the Prophet and the Ahl al-Bayt had been martyred at Karbala, and so were many of the family members of the Prophet. The Imam was also in severe taqiyya, and he only had 3 to 5 solid companions, and there were few true Shia. It was also difficult for people to know who the true Imam was. So these were the challenges he faced, but by the end of his life, he had around 173 solid and faithful students and companions, such as Abu Hamza al-Thumali, who's known for the dua that he's narrated. The success of the 5th and 6th Imam, Imam Muhammad al-Baqir and Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq, and the advances they made in Islamic sciences and their large amounts of students was for a large part because Imam al-Sajjad set the groundwork for them and rebuilt, in a way, rebuilt Islam. And many of the du'as written by Imam al-Sajjad have been compiled into collections such as As-Sahifat al-Sajjadiyya. He used these du'as to spread true Islamic values and teachings. It's also amazing that the Imam survived the 57 years of his life despite all the enmity he faced by the Umayyad dynasty. Today I will mention one instance of the Imam acting in a way that was the most beneficial for the Muslims. All eyes were on him, so Imam Sajjad understood that it was not wise to act militarily, and he only participated indirectly when necessary. Within 5 to 6 years of his return to Medina, three important uprisings occurred, and the role that the Imam did or did not play in these uprisings tells us about the character of the Imam, particularly his wisdom. So the first uprising was the uprising of Harra. It was in Medina. It's named this after the geological features surrounding Medina, which are these lava rocks. It happened in 63 AH, two years after the events of Karbala. It was led by Abdullah ibn Hanzala. Abdullah's father Hanzala was a martyr at the Battle of Badr. So he led the uprising, but it wasn't because he wanted to help the Imam. It was just that they happened to have the common enemy of Yazid. Since the Medinas had kicked out the Umayyad governor, Yazid sent a Syrian army led by Muslim ibn Uqba to quell the Medina rebellion. So during this uprising, the people of Medina were massacred, and the city was disgraced to such an extent that the masjid of the Prophet was used as a stable for the soldiers' horses. But the Imam Sajjad and his family had no part in this uprising, and he even wrote a letter to Yazid saying that he had nothing to do with this rebellion. Because of this, Yazid gave orders to his commanders not to harm Imam Sajjad or his family in any way. The second uprising was the uprising of the Tawabin. Their leader was Sulaiman ibn Surad, and it happened in 65 AH. It was called the Tawabin because the members were repentant for not having fought for Imam Hussein, and they wanted to redeem themselves. Tawabin means those who repent. These people also felt very guilty for being among the 18,000 people who wrote letters urging Imam Hussein to come to Kufa and then reneging on their pledge. The uprising had politically Shia motives, but little more than that. The Tawabin followed the Imams as political leaders, but they did not recognize them to have the outstanding qualities we know them to have. Therefore, they didn't have any real direction from the Imam Sajjad, and although they won a few battles, they were eventually destroyed by the Yazid's army. The Tawabin did not reach out to Imam Sajjad in any way, and they did not fight because the Imam was leading them. It was mainly out of guilt. The third and final uprising was Mukhtar's uprising. It was in 67 and 67 AH, 66 and 67 AH. It was led by Mukhtar ibn Ubayd al-Thaqafi. He was a prominent member of Kufa and very politically and militarily savvy. And he was also a devout Shia and a pious one too. He was imprisoned by Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad, and for some time, so he wasn't able to assist Imam Hussein at Karbala. His mission was to take revenge on those who had committed crimes at Karbala. And although it is difficult to determine who Mukhtar was following, it's apparent that Imam Sajjad was behind the scenes, though he did hide his tracks quite well. And there isn't any direct relationship between Mukhtar and Imam Sajjad. The go-between was Muhammad ibn Hanafiya, the half-brother of Imam Hassan and Hussein. So because he went to Imam Muhammad ibn Hanafiya for advice, this led people to think he was part of this deviant sect called the Kaysaniya. These people thought that Muhammad ibn Hanafiya was the next Imam. According to most hadith, Muhammad ibn Hanafiya never made any claim for imamate. The hadith that do show him making this claim can be interpreted that this was a show that he and the Imam made to prove who the actual Imam was and destroy any disagreements. Mukhtar was not part of this sect, and later Imams praised his bravery greatly. You can see the strategic planning of the Imam through his actions with these uprisings. The Imam made the best of this situation while still doing the duty of the Imam. As I said before, he paved the way for his son and grandson and allowed them to preach freely without worry of persecution. He's also praised by Sunnis and Shias alike for his character and piousness. Imam Sajjad continued the mission of Imam Hussein, which was to save Islam, and he played a very important role in reviving Islam when it would have otherwise been corrupted forever. Salawat.
MashaAllah. I should have had my notebook with me. There were so many historical points, MashaAllah. Very well done for Yahya Rastu.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الحمد لله الذي له ما في السماوات وما في الأرض وله الحمد في الآخرة وهو الحكيم الخبير والصلاة والسلام على المبعوث إلى كافة الورى بشيرا ونذيرا وداعيا إلى الله بإذنه وسراجا منيرا أبي القاسم محمد اللهم صل وعلى أهل بيته أئمة الهدى ومصابيح الدجى الذين أذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا اللهم صل. أما بعد فقد قال الله سبحانه وتعالى في كتابه الكريم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قالوا سمعنا فتى يذكرهم يقال له إبراهيم صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. Respected scholars, my elders, brothers and sisters in Islam, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. I've titled tonight's lecture, The Chivalrous Youth, for reasons that will become apparent quite soon. And I'd like to begin this lecture by looking at a very famous story in the Quran, which involves Nabi Ibrahim, ala nabiyina wa alayhi wa alihi salam. This story is that famous one where he smashes up the idols in order to demonstrate to the idol worshippers how mistaken they were in their worship of these man-made idols. It is reported in Surah Al-Anbiya, verse number 58 onwards. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala explains the story as follows. The people had gone out of the town, and so Nabi Ibrahim, in order to prove his point, he smashes up all of the idols except the biggest one of them. And then when the people come back, they see what's happened to their so-called gods, and they start asking questions. What's happened to these idols? They are told that, in fact, they had heard of this person, and this person was speaking ill of their idols. This is the verse that I recited a few moments ago. قَالُوا سَمِعْنَا فَتًى يَذْكُرُهُ يُقَالُ لَهُ إِبْرَاهِيمُ. We have heard of a fata. Now, this word fata, which will translate for the present time as young man, is really central to the whole majlis tonight. So they say that we heard of this young man who was speaking ill. He was speaking unkindly about our gods, and he is called Ibrahim. So then they say, okay, bring this Ibrahim to us. The people will bear witness as to what he has done. They bring him and they ask him, was it you who did this to our gods? Nabi Ibrahim, he responds by saying, well, why don't you ask the biggest one? Ask them all. Indeed, it was the biggest one who did this. This is when they begin to realize that how mistaken they were in their beliefs. They hang their heads in shame, and they say that you know very well that they cannot speak. Now, this is when Nabi Ibrahim brings that point that he wanted to make home to them, and he proves his argument. He says to them, then therefore, do you worship something besides Allah that can neither cause you harm nor benefit? So you see, this is when Nabi Ibrahim manages to prove his point. Now, like I said, the whole majlis tonight will focus around this word fata that the people used to describe him. They had heard of this fata, this young man who was speaking ill about these gods, and he is called Ibrahim. What is the meaning of fata? Can we just simply translate it as young man? In one sense, that is perfectly correct, and we can use that for the translation of this verse. But I want you to look more deeply into this term that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses in the Quran to describe Ibrahim. So we are told that one of the best ways, in fact the best way to do tafsir of the Quran and to find the meanings of words and phrases in the Quran is to examine other verses of the Quran itself. We are told by none other than Amirul Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib sallallahu alayhi that this is the way to understand the Quran. وَيَنْتِقُ بَعْدُهُ بِبَعْدٍ وَيَشْهُدُ بَعْدُهُ عَلَى بَعْدٍ. That means that parts of the Quran speak about other parts, and parts of it give testimony over other parts. Meaning that the best way to find out the meaning of words and phrases in the Quran is to allow the Quran to speak for itself. Because parts of it will talk about other parts of it will give testimony and bear witness over other parts. So, I took this approach and I looked at where else in the Quran is this word fata used, if at all. I found 2 other places where this word is used, and I thought this would be a good way to get a good, deeper meaning about this word. It's used in Surah Al-Kahf to describe the Ashabul Kahf, the companions of the cave. In Surah Al-Kahf verses 10 and 13, the plural form of this word fata is used, i.e. fitya, meaning the fatas. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not only is Ibrahim known as fata, but we also see that the companions of the cave are called fatas. In verse 10, first of all, إِذْ أَوَلْ فِتْيَةُ إِلَى الْكَهْفِ. When the fatas, when these fitya, these young men as we have been translating it so far, took refuge in the cave. That's one instance. And then 3 verses later, in verse number 13, again, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala repeats the same word, fitya, the plural of fata. So He says, إِنَّهُمْ فِتْيَةٌ آمَنُوا بِرَبِّهِمْ. Indeed, they were fatas who had faith in their Lord. Now, the question arises, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala calls them fatas, but He has repeated the word just 3 verses after the first time. In verse 10, he's already said, when the Fatahs took refuge in the cave. 3 verses later, he says that they were Fatahs who believed in their Lord. They had faith in their Lord. So the question arises, why does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala repeat the word again 3 verses later? He could have easily have said, Innahum amanu bi rabbihim. They are people who believed in the Lord. They believed in the Lord. Simple as that. Why say they were Fatahs who believed in the Lord? Why repeat the word again when we have already been introduced to who they were and to this description of them? When we look at the exegesis about this verse, we find that there are a number of opinions, but the one that I would like to put forward today is about the fact that, according to some exegetes, this quality of them being Fatah was instrumental in them taking a stance against the non-believers. That's why Allah felt it necessary to repeat this word, so that He wants to draw attention. He wants to highlight the fact that because they were Fatahs, they took up this stance and they uprose against the non-believers. So here now we are seeing that simply the word Fatah cannot only be translated as young man, because it has to be something more than that. In fact, in the traditions we are told that actually Ashabul Kahf were not that young anyway. They were not youth as we normally understand the word youth to mean. They were of an older age. And therefore, if they were not youth, we cannot simply say that this word is referring to their age. It's referring to something else. This something else, indeed, through my research, so far I have been able to come across this conclusion, that it is all dependent on the word that this word comes from, futuwa. It is because they had this quality of futuwa that they were able to uprise against the non-believers. And hence Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is drawing attention to this quality of futuwa. What is futuwa? This is a word that is very difficult to translate into English precisely and accurately with only one term. Indeed, today I was having a discussion with Sheikh Rizwan Arastu about this, and it is very difficult to pinpoint one word which will capture the entire meaning of futuwa, but perhaps the nearest word to it in English is chivalry. So, when we talk about Fatah, we're talking about a chivalrous person. What is a chivalrous person? Well, from my research I have put together 3 essential qualities of Fatahs. We see this in the case of Nabi Ibrahim. We see this in the case of Ashabul Kahf, and we also see it in perhaps the most famous statement about someone known as a Fatah. That is none other than Amirul Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib sallallahu alayhi. You all know that statement. You all know about the incident. It happened in the battle of Uhud, when Imam Ali alayhi salam, he fought the enemy very bravely. Then he defends Rasulullah, and then this cry is heard from the heavens. What is that cry? La Fatah illa Ali, La Sayfa illa Dhul-Faqar. There is no Fatah, there is no chivalrous person like Ali, and there is no sword like Dhul-Faqar. So now what are the commonalities? If we say we are talking about chivalry, and of course there are other explanations about these verses, but the one that I would like to put forward is this, that these commonalities are as follows. All Fatahs, they have this attribute of futuwa, chivalry. They have 3 qualities. First of all, they have God consciousness. Secondly, they are courageous. And thirdly, they have this desire to uphold the truth. We see this in the case of Nabi Ibrahim. God conscious, courageous, wanting to uphold the truth. We see this in the example of Ashabul Kahf. We see this in the example of Imam Ali alayhi salam. Indeed, you will recall that example when Imam Ali stands on the shoulders of Rasulullah. He does exactly what Nabi Ibrahim did, but in another context. He stands on the shoulders of Rasulullah and he smashes the idols that were placed on top of the Kaaba. So, we have this commonality now. People upholding the truth, combating falsehood, being courageous, having God consciousness. So now, Nabi Ibrahim smashes the idol of his time. Ashabul Kahf, they smash idols of their time by taking up this stance against the non-believers. Imam Ali does the same. He smashes not just the idols on top of the Kaaba, but also idols of shirk and jahiliyyah and ignorance. So now, my brothers and sisters, what I would like to present tonight is how we can also become fatas. We can also embody this attribute of chivalry and raise a community of fatas indeed. That's why I've called this lecture the chivalrous youth. How we, first of all as parents, as adults, can increase in our futuwah and then raise a generation of fatas who will also be idol smashers. What idols can we smash? What idols can our youth smash? It's not going to be now those idols made out of clay and stone. The idols that we, inshallah, are smashing. And of course, this applies to me first and foremost. And mu'mineen are doing this. But just to remind everyone and to increase this quality of futuwah, the idols of today are much more sophisticated. They are much more complex than in those days. There are idols such as the idols of materialism, consumerism, of lewdness, promiscuity, idols of selfishness, being I-centric rather than God-centric. These are all idols of today that inshallah we are smashing, and we can smash even more by being fatas and raising a community of fatas. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Let me explore this in greater depth. We have this wonderful tradition from Imam Jafar al-Sadiq salawatullah wa salamu alayhi. He puts it like this. He says that the best of your youth resemble your adults. The best of your youth resemble your adults. Meaning they have this mature thinking which is reflected in their actions. And then he says, the worst of your adults are those who resemble your youth. Meaning, the worst of our adults are those who don't have this maturity in their thinking, and therefore their actions reflect that. Now, when we look at this, we should try and see from the examples of the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, how they were able to inculcate this quality of futuwah within them. Indeed, it is incumbent on us to be able to raise a community of fatas. First of all, expand on this futuwah ourselves, but definitely make sure that the next generation are keeping the values and the principles that we believe in, that the Quran tells us about, the teaching of the Ahlul Bayt tell us, so that continuously there is this capacity in the new generation. Sometimes they're traveling different places around the world, and often, I'm not talking about this community, I don't know enough about this community, but generally speaking, often I see that everything is being done by the adults. The youth are not given enough opportunity. They are not given enough responsibility. They are unable to take positions of responsibility and leadership. And that community tends to be amongst the most stagnant of communities. What we need to do is, inshallah, train a generation with the examples of the Quran and Ahlul Bayt, taking inspiration from the adults so they can take up the reins and carry on the hard work that the adults have been doing all of these years, so that the community never remains stagnant, let alone go backwards. And so in order to do this, we need guidance. We need examples. What examples do we have of young leaders in the community who show this futuwah? Remember the qualities of a fatah. Someone who's God conscious, brave and courageous, and upholds the truth. Well, we are in the days of mourning. Look what we see on the plains of Karbala. How many fatas were there in the plains of Karbala? Remember, it's nothing to do with age as such. It's having the quality of futuwah. But even if we look at age, we had these great young examples. Aoun, Muhammad, Qasim, all of them were great young leaders that had this futuwah. Look what they did to uphold the truth. Look at their courage. Look at their God consciousness. Also, Ali Akbar at a older age slightly than the others. All of these were our great young leaders, not just in Karbala. What about when we look at the leadership of our imams? We have 3 imams who were leaders at a very young age. What inspiration more do we need than to look at these type of examples? So our 9th holy imam became the imam at the age of 7 years and 4 months. Our 10th holy imam became the imam at the age of 7 years and 11 months. How about our imam, Imam Sahib al-Asri wal Zaman, Ajjalallahu ta'ala farajul sharif. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. 4 years and 7 months, he becomes the imam. So we have these inspirational models who we can emulate and take as examples. First of all, with regards to ourselves as adults, to increase this futuwah within us, and then to raise a generation of fatas based on the examples of the Quran and the Ahlul Bayt. Inshallah, I would like to now present some more examples from the Quran in particular, and some practical tips as to how we can inshallah do this. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. So I would like to look at a number of examples, but time is short, and of course this whole topic can be delivered over a number of lectures. As a summarized form of this whole topic, I would like to point to a few examples only, and inshallah you will see that there are many practical tips as well. As I mentioned yesterday, one of the main aims I have in this series of 5 lectures is to present not only theoretical points but practical tips, things that we can do as soon as we leave the majlis, or inshallah we're all doing them anyway, but do them more in a more perhaps qualitative way, and just as a reminder how we can go about doing this. So one example is the blessed life of Imam Ali ibn Musa Riza salawatullah wa salamu alayhi. Look how the Ahlul Bayt raised their children to be fatas. He writes a letter which has reached us to his blessed son Imam Muhammad al-Taqi al-Jawad salawatullah wa salamu alayhi. Now we have to remember the context of this letter. The Imam is where? He's in Khurasan. His son is where? In Medina. Despite all of those difficulties, the Imam writes a letter to him. Look at the content of the letter, and then we'll see what lessons we can derive from this. The Imam writes to him that I have been informed that whenever you want to leave the house, the servants are telling you to leave from the small gate. We can say like the back door. But he says to him that this is because of their stinginess. He says to his son, they are stingy, meaning he explains that they want you to leave from the back gate, from the back door rather than the front door, because they know that people are going to come to you and they're going to ask you for money. And so they are telling you to go from the back door. Now, look at the advice the Imam gives to his son. He says, by the right that I have over you, I want you to always make sure when you leave from the front door. And he says that when you leave, make sure that you have gold and silver in your pockets. So when you go out, when people ask you, you're able to give it to them. And he even specifies, he says, if one of your uncles asks you for some money, give them X amount. And if you want, you can give them more. And then he says, if one of your aunties asks you for money, give her Y amount. And he says, if you want, you can give her more. And he says, by Allah, I want Allah to raise you, so never fear poverty. Now, what an amazing letter. First of all, when we look at this, we see that there are so many lessons we can derive just from this letter alone. Where was the Imam? In Khurasan. His son is in Medina. The first thing we learn from this, if we want to train our children according to the teachings of the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, is to always have an interest in what our children are doing. Again, this is something that I see quite a lot around different places, that Unfortunately knew so much about his son, and he took this interest in what he's doing to the extent that he knew even these small things. So having an interest in what our children are doing is absolutely critical and essential. Secondly, effective communication. The Imam, despite that distance between Khorasan and Medina, he still had this communication with his son, and he made sure that a letter was reached from Khorasan to Medina. He made sure that he was in touch all the time. Now, again, this is something that we are seeing less and less in some parts of the community, that basically parents and their children, they no longer communicate properly with each other. Everything is I and the Royal Highness and iPhones and iPads, and everything is I. And therefore, this is something else what the Imam tells us. He managed to communicate with his son despite those difficulties he was under, despite the distance. This day and age, even if our children move away, they go to study somewhere, they go to work somewhere, there is no excuse not to have this effective communication with them. With the increases in technology that we have, the advancements that have been made in technology, emails, video conferencing, social media, mobile technology, there's absolutely no excuse why children cannot have effective communication with their parents and parents with their children. Thirdly, what does the Imam focus on? This is absolutely essential for us to bear in mind. If we want to raise a generation of fatas, what does he focus on? Does he focus on the material well-being of his son? He doesn't. In other places, definitely, we would see the Imam's focus in so many different areas. In this letter, we see that the Imam is focusing on the spiritual development of his son, on the religious development of his son. Sometimes parents will do number 1 and 2, meaning they will have that interest in what their children are doing, fine. They will have that communication with their children, fine. But what is all that about? Often it will be about their material well-being. It might be about their education. It might be about health, whatever it might be. All of these things are absolutely necessary. They are 100% important. They are needed. But often we see, unfortunately, that the spiritual and the religious concern of parents is lacking. They concentrate on many other areas, absolutely necessary, but to the expense of their religious concern, to the expense of that religious guidance. They will make sure that their children are doing well, or they'll ask about, they'll communicate about all sorts of things. But what about their spiritual development? The Imam says to his son, quite the opposite of what some parents might focus on, i.e. the material side. He's saying, give more of your wealth in the way of Allah. Make sure that you're leaving from the front door. Put yourself in a position whereby people can refer to you and ask you for things. And you now become a lantern of guidance. You now become a source of help for others. Put yourself in that situation. Give money. He even specifies the minimum amount that he should give to his uncle and to his aunt. And he says, if you want to give them more, you can. Look at the focus of the Imam on the spiritual and on the religious well-being of his son. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. In fact, all of this, my brothers and sisters, as you know, this will all come back to us as parents. The more we focus on their spiritual well-being and on their religious upbringing, it's only going to come back to us in the Akhirah. Indeed, our children are the greatest investment we have. Let me illustrate this by means of a story. This is explained to us by Imam Jafar Sadiq salawatullah wa salamu alayhi. He reports from Rasulullah Akram sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, who says that one day Nabi Isa ibn Maryam, he's going through a graveyard, and Nabi Isa, he comes across a grave and he sees with his special type of vision and the ilmul ghaib that Allah blesses people with, prophets and imams with, when he deems it necessary, that the inhabitant of that grave is undergoing punishment. He's being punished. Now, it so happens that the following year, he goes past that same grave. And this time, he notices that the inhabitant of that grave is no longer being punished. So, Nabi Isa asks Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that last year I went past, this person was being punished, this year is not being punished. Why is that? What is the response of Allah? Allah responds by telling him that this person, he had a walad salih, meaning a righteous child. This walad salih did two things. He built a road, he repaired a road, and he gave refuge to an orphan. Because of these good deeds of that son, of that person, I have removed the punishment from his father. You see, my brothers and sisters, all of these efforts that we do, they're only going to come back to us in the akhirah. They are our greatest investment, our children. And inshallah, they will benefit us in the akhirah. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Let's look at the Quran for some more inspiration and some more practical guidelines as to how we can do this. First of all, when we look at Surah Safar, verse number 102 onwards, we read about the story of Nabi Ibrahim and his son Hazrat Ismail. This is one of those amazing stories that tells us so much about the relationship between parents and children and how it should be. I'll just quote a few lines, but there are so many lessons throughout the whole story. Basically, you all know the story that Nabi Ibrahim sees in his dream, sees in his sleep, on 3 consecutive nights, that Allah is instructing him to slaughter his son Hazrat Ismail. Look how the verse explains the conversation and the communication that takes place between father and son. So, first of all, Nabi Ibrahim, he comes to his son, Hazrat Ismail, and he says, Qala ya bunay. He says, oh my dear son, Inni ara fil manam anni azbahuk fanzur madha tara. He says that, oh my dear son, I have seen in my dream that I am slaughtering you. What do you think? Now, just from this, there are so many lessons for us and practical tips to take away as to how we should be with our parents and how we should be with our children. First of all, how does he address his son? He addresses him by saying, Ya bunay. Ya bunay in Arabic, my dear son. So, the first thing we get from this is when we address our children, let's address them using terms of endearment. Let's give them this respect and love when we want to talk to them. Then what else? He is an Ulul Azam prophet, as we explained yesterday. He's one of those 5 great prophets that came with new legislation. But still, he seeks the opinion of his son. Even though Allah has told him what he has to do, he involves his son. He asks him his opinion. He says, I have seen in my dream that I'm slaughtering you. Fanzur madha tara. And he says, see what you think. Allahu Akbar. Let's now, inshallah, learn from this. Involve our children in our discussions, in what we are talking about, the important things in our life. Involve them in some way. This will give them confidence. This will give them self-esteem. That Baba and Mama, they are involving me. They value my opinion. Now, that's true for the parents. But then there's also something for the children. All of you young people here who are listening, there's also a very important lesson for you all as well. Look at the response of the son to the father. What does he say? He says, Ya abati fa'al ma tu'mar. Allahu Akbar. Look at the response of Hazrat Ismail to his father. He says that, oh my father, do whatever you have been commanded to do. Look at the respect from the son to the parent. He makes it easy for his father to do this. He doesn't say, oh father, slaughter me. Oh father, kill me. If he had have used those type of words, slaughter, kill, it would have made it very difficult for the father. They're too sensitive. It would have made it very hard for him to go ahead. He says it in a way that makes it as easy as possible for his father to do this very difficult act. He says, oh father, do whatever you have been commanded to do. So, the message for my younger brothers and sisters is to always respond to parents in a respectful way. Choose your words in a way that it won't hurt them. It won't make their task difficult. They only want the best for you. And therefore, respect what they are saying. Answer in a way that shows them that the respect and that love that they deserve. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. But now also, when we look at this, we see that there are other examples as well. In the Quran, we are told, in fact, one of the best places for all of this inspiration and practical tips when we want to talk about raising a generation of fatas and increasing fatuwa in ourselves is to look at the stories of the Prophet. For example, in Surah Yusuf, we are told about these great stories and the value of looking at them. لَقَدْ كَانَ فِي قَصَصِهِمْ عِبْرَةٌ لِأُولِي الْأَلْبَابِ. Verse number 111 of Surah Yusuf tells us that in the stories of the prophets there is ibrah. There are morals, there are lessons for those who possess intellect. So, another story in the Quran from which we can gain inspiration and guidance and practical tips to raise a community of fatas. This story involves a fata himself, a great fata, Nabi Yusuf himself. So, this story is told to us in verses 22 and 23 of Surah Yusuf. The story, again, is one of those famous ones which you all know about. Put it in context, it happened when the brothers of Nabi Yusuf were feeling jealous about the love that Hazrat Yaqub had for his son Yusuf. And so they devised this plan to get rid of their brother Yusuf. So what they do is they convince their father that they want to take Nabi Yusuf. He reluctantly agrees, but their plan is to throw him in a well and then someone will find him and take him away. So that's what they do. They come back, they lie to their father that a wolf has eaten Yusuf and Nabi Yusuf now is in the well. What happens is a caravan comes along, finds him, takes him to Egypt, and now he's in the house of one of the chiefs of Egypt. He's living there. But now there's a woman, Zulaykha. She now is attracted to Nabi Yusuf. Now, this, my brothers and sisters, is a lesson in resisting temptation. If we want to be fatas with those three characteristics, we must be able to resist all sorts of temptations. Sometimes it will be real. It will be a person or a thing right there in front of us. But nowadays, more and more, the temptation that we must resist is in the form of online temptation, is in the form of virtual temptation. And this is something that we really need to combat. We really need to think about. How can we do this? Let's have a look at this story. How does Nabi Yusuf, this great fata mentioned in the Quran, resist the advances of Zulaykha? Everything was ripe, everything was ready for a great sin to be done. He does 4 things. If we can bear in mind these 4 things, inshallah, we will also be able to resist all types of temptations, even more than we are doing at the moment. What does he do? First of all, he says, Qala ma'adallah. He says, refuge in Allah. The first thing we must do when we are faced with temptation is to do ista'adha. I spoke about this last night, so I won't delve into it much. but truly with our minds and in our actions, we must move away from the temptations of shaitan. We must shun shaitan. We must reject what he is whispering to us. Ma'adallah, truly seeking refuge in Allah. Then what does he say? Innahu Rabbi. Indeed, he recognizes that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is his Lord. But he doesn't just use any word here. He says, Rabbi, meaning he is my sustainer. He is my nourisher. He looks after me. So, let's also remember Allah is our Lord. He's our nourisher. He's our sustainer. Just as he has provided for us up to now, he will continue to provide for us, but in a halal way. Remember what Allah has done for us already. There's no need to go down that route of that temptation. Allah is our nourisher, our sustainer. He will provide for us in a halal way. Then what does he do? He says, Ahsana mathwai, meaning he has been provided with a good abode. Remember where he was? He was in that well. Now where is he? He's in this palace. He's in this great abode. Everything is there for him. Allah has provided for him this huge bounty. So the lesson we get from this, the third lesson, when we are faced with temptation, is to remember our blessings, our bounties. So many of them, all of us, we are blessed in so many ways. Let's reflect over the bounties we have already. Why do we need to go down that route of that temptation? When we have our faith, when we have our family, our parents, our health, knowledge, whatever we have, they are all blessings from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَمَا بِكُم مِّن نِعْمَةٍ فَمِنَ اللَّهِ. Whatever blessing you have is from Allah. So Nabi Yusuf remembers the blessings that he has. Ahsana mathwai. He has been provided with this great abode. And then fourthly and finally, what does he say? إِنَّهُ لَا يُفْلِحُ الظَّالِمُونَ. He remembers the akhirah. He says, indeed, the wrongdoers will not be prosperous. So, when we are faced with temptation, let's remember there will be a hisab and kitab. There will be accounting and reckoning. Let's remember the akhirah. Therefore, if we do these four things, inshallah, we will be able to resist, whether it's real or virtual temptation, even more than we are doing at the moment. First of all, seeking true isti'adha in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Secondly, acknowledging He is our Rabb. He is our nourisher and sustainer, and He will provide for us in a halal way. Thirdly, our bounties. Let's remunerate all of our bounties and remember them. And fourthly, remember the akhirah. Nothing goes without punishment. No sin goes without punishment. And good deeds will be rewarded. How does Allah end this episode? He says, كَذَلِكَ لِنَّسْرِفَ عَنْهُ السُّوءَ وَالْفَحْشَى. This is how we keep him away from as-su' and fahsha, from evil and indecency. Allahu Akbar. Inshallah, this will be the conclusion of all of us whenever we resist this temptation in this way. That Allah therefore will keep away from us all evil and indecency. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So as a summary, just before we mention a few words of Masa'ib, we were looking at tonight the chivalrous youth. And we said that we have examples in the Quran and in the traditions where this word fatah is used. And one interpretation of this is the fact that it is more than just being young. Because we have examples where definitely people were referred to as fatah, but they were not young themselves. Like the Ashabul Kahf. Nabi Ibrahim is described as fatah. So is Imam Ali alayhi salam. We see the examples of these great personalities in the Quran. Then we looked at how we can train, and we must train the future generations to be fatah and increase futuwa and chivalry within us. We said chivalry has these three qualities. We see in all the fatahs mentioned in the Quran and in the traditions of being God conscious, courageous, and wanting to uphold the truth. How can we do this? We look at the examples of great fatahs in our history, such as those in Karbala, such as our young imams. We had the example of Imam Ali ibn Musa Reza communicating with his son. And the lessons we gain from that we must take a keen interest in our children, effective communication with them, and focusing also on the religious aspects, not just plainly the material and educational and social and other aspects of their well-being. We also looked at examples in the Quran, most notably the example of Hazrat Ismail and his father, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in just a few lines so many lessons. The fact that parents should talk to their children with love, endearment and with affection. The fact that we should involve our children in our discussions and what is important in our lives. And also that children should also respond to parents in a very polite and respectful way, in a way that makes their life easy, does not make it difficult for them. And then of course we saw how we can resist temptation, for this is indeed something that all fathers must do. They must be able to resist all temptation, whether it's all evil temptation, whether it's virtual or real. And we can do this by looking at the example of Nabi Yusuf, for indeed the stories of the prophets we are told in the Quran are ibrah and morals. They are lessons for us. What does he do? He does these four things. He does isti'adha and seeks refuge in Allah. He remembers Allah is his Lord and nourisher. He counts his blessings, remembers his blessings, and he remembers the akhirah, inshallah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala enable us to put this into practice. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Sallallahu alayka ya Aba Abdillah. Sallallahu alayka ya ibna Rasulillah. Sallallahu alayka wa ala al-arwah allati hallat bithna'i. Alayka minni salamullahi abada. ما بقيت وبقي الليل والنهار ولا جعله الله آخر العهد مني لزيارتكم. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين. The sacred head of Abu Abdullah was often kissed with such affection and love by his grandfather Rasulullah. The sacred head of Abu Abdullah was often on the lap of his holy mother, Lady Fatima Zahra. Tonight, let's recall what happened to this sacred head of Imam Hussein alayhi salam, both on the day of Ashura and after Ashura. What insult was this head subject to? What great disrespect did this head of Abu Abdullah experience both on the day of Ashura and afterwards? On the day of Ashura, we are told that the sacred head of Sayyidul Shuhada was struck 3 times. Let's recall when these 3 times happened. The first time, we are told that there was an arrow shot into the forehead of Abu Abdullah. When the arrow is shot into his forehead, he pulls it out. All the blood runs onto his face and onto his beard. At that time, he calls out to Allah. He says, "Oh Allah, you witness what is happening to me. You are witness as to how these people have treated me." The second time that the sacred head was hit on the day of Ashura, when Abu Abdullah became tired of fighting, he just wanted a rest for a few moments. At that time, a stone was thrown onto the head and it struck the forehead of Abu Abdullah. The third time was when Imam Hussein was very near his final moments in this life. For at that time, he was struck over the head with a sword. But my brothers and sisters, Mu'mineen, this was not all. For even after what Shimr had done to the holy head of Abu Abdullah, Still the insult continued. These people were so depraved that now they take the sacred head of Imam Hussein and they place it on top of a spear and they parade the holy head around the streets of Kufa and Sham. But still, Mu'mineen, this is not enough for these depraved people. Still, they do greater injustices to the holy head of Abu Abdullah. It is reported that Sahal ibn Sa'd says he was a companion and a person who narrated traditions from Rasulullah. He reports that when I entered Sham, I saw that the people were rejoicing. He says that the people were saying that the head of Imam Hussein is being brought to Sham as a present. It's coming from Iraq. So Sal says that now I went to the gate where the women and the children were coming. He says, look how he describes the scene. He says that when I looked at this gate, what did I see? I saw flag after flag coming from this gate. After that I saw there was a group of women and children. They were tied. They were being forced to move here and there. And some of them were on camels without any saddles. And then he says that amongst these people there were these soldiers. He says that I saw one of these soldiers, he had a spear in his hand. On top of the spear was a head. And he says that when I looked at this head, it reminded me of the face of Rasulullah. So then he goes to this caravan of people coming through. He approaches one of the young girls. He says, oh daughter, who are you? And she says, I am Sakina bint al-Hussein. I am the daughter of Hussein. And he says to her, oh Sakina, is there anything that I can do for you? For I am Sahal ibn Sa'd. I knew your grandfather and I reported traditions from your grandfather. What can I do for you? She says, oh Sahal, there is one thing you can do. Tell these people who have this head of my father, tell them to move the head away from here so that the people become busy in looking at their head and they don't look at us, for we are the family of the Prophet of Allah. But Mu'mineen, even that was not enough, for now the sacred head of Abu Abdullah is brought in front of Yazid. At that time in the palace of Yazid, he's having a gathering where alcohol is being served. The sacred head of Imam Hussein is brought in a basin made out of gold. It is taken towards Yazid. Yazid places the head in front of him. He carries on drinking wine in front of the head of Imam Hussein. But then he does something that only such a depraved person as him could do. He takes his stick and he starts striking the teeth of Abu Abdullah with his stick. Allah la'natullah ala al-qawmi al-zalimin wa sayalamu alladhina zalamu ayyam munqalibin yanqalibun. Oh Allah, by the right of Imam Hussein, by the rights of all the Shuhada and Usra of Karbala, all the martyrs and the captives of Karbala, oh Allah, we ask you to accept the following praise. Oh Allah, enable us to raise a community of fatahs, inshallah. Oh Allah, enable us to increase in this quality of futuwa within us. Oh Allah, enable us to always learn and act according to the teachings of the Quran and the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam. Oh Allah, bless this center and all those who frequent it. Oh Allah, bring relief to all those who are facing difficulty around the world. Oh Allah, enable us to always live and die with the wilayah of the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam. And oh Allah, our last but not least prayer is that you hasten the appearance of the 12th Holy Imam. Ajjalallahu ta'ala faraju sharif. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.